Victoria Job's hands were shaking, but she did not stop pulling. The man's weight dragged against the wet pavement, his blood smearing a dark line behind them like a trail no one was supposed to follow. 3 in the morning in Itaewon was supposed to be quiet. Just drunk tourists and tired taxi drivers, not a stranger bleeding out behind a noodle shop with 2 men in black, still searching the alley with flashlights. She had no plan. She only had instinct. The same instinct that made her grab strangers' hands when they tripped on Lagos buses. The same instinct her mother always said would either save her life or end it one day. Tonight, it chose to drag a half-dead Korean man through a service door into the cramped one-room apartment she rented above a laundromat. The door clicked shut. She slid down against it, chest heaving, listening for footsteps that never came. Only then did she look properly at the man bleeding on her kitchen floor, and only then did her brain catch up with what her body had already done. "Why I just do this kind thing?" she whispered to herself, gripping her own hair. "Why I just carry trouble enter my house like this?" The man's eyes opened, just barely, dark and unfocused, fixed on the ceiling fan spinning lazily above him. "Gwenchana," he managed, voice rough, like the word cost him something. "I'm fine." "You know fine," Victoria snapped, already reaching for the first aid kit she kept for her own clumsy kitchen accidents. "You dey bleed like tomato stew from my floor, and you dey tell me you fine. A beg, shut up and let me check your body." That was how it started. Not with a meet cute in a coffee shop, not with 2 name cards exchanged at a corporate mixer, but with Victoria Job, 26 years old, broke, proud, and 3 months behind on rent, cutting open a stranger's shirt to find a bullet wound she had no business knowing how to treat. To understand how she got there, you have to go back 6 months earlier, to the version of Victoria who landed in Seoul with 2 suitcases and a nursing certificate from a school in Lagos that no Korean hospital wanted to recognize. She came chasing a dream that had already started shrinking the moment her plane touched down. The agency that promised her a placement at a hospital disappeared with half her savings. What was left of the dream became 3 part-time jobs: cleaning offices at dawn, working the till at a convenience store in the afternoon, and tutoring English to bored rich kids in the evening. Kids who called her the Black Nuna behind her back, and sometimes to her face. She was loud where Seoul wanted her quiet. She laughed too easily where Seoul wanted her composed. And she missed home so badly some nights that she would call her mother just to listen to the sound of Lagos traffic in the background. Her mother always asked the same question, every single call, whether she had eaten, and Victoria always lied and said yes, even on the nights her dinner was a single boiled egg and instant noodles split into 2 meals to stretch her last few won until payday. But she also loved Seoul in the stubborn way you love something that makes you work for it. She loved the convenience store lights at midnight, the smell of street food carts, the way the city never quite slept, just like her. None of that explained why a man covered in blood ended up on her kitchen floor, but it explained why she didn't call the police. Victoria Job had learned the hard way that systems in this city rarely worked in her favor when she was the one who needed help. She had decided long ago that if trouble landed on her doorstep, she would handle it herself, her way. So she handled it. She cleaned the wound with hands that had stopped shaking by the 3rd stitch, because under all that fear, Victoria Job was good at this. Better than the hospitals that refused to hire her ever gave her credit for. The man watched her work through pain-clenched eyes, occasionally hissing, occasionally muttering something in Korean that she didn't understand and didn't bother asking about. "You go just lie there and look fine, boy," she muttered, threading the last stitch. "As if na catwalk you dey waka come meet me for road." "You talk a lot," he said, breath uneven, "for someone hiding a criminal." "I never hide nobody," Victoria shot back. "I just a help person way almost die. If na criminal you be, make you die for hospital, not for my kitchen floor where I go. Need bleach to clean blood after." Despite the pain, something close to a laugh escaped him, quickly swallowed when it pulled at his stitches. "Aigu," he groaned, glaring at her. "You're dangerous." "You're the one who get bullet inside your body and you dey call me dangerous," she said, snapping the first aid kit closed. "Make sense, I beg." He gave her a name eventually when the bleeding had slowed and the fever had not yet started. He said his name was Wonbin. Just Wonbin. No surname, no explanation for the men with flashlights, no explanation for the gun she had found tucked in his jacket and quietly hidden inside a rice bag in her cupboard. The safest place she could think of on short notice. She didn't ask further. She told herself it was because she was tired, not because some instinct in her chest already understood that the less she knew, the safer she'd stay. He stayed 3 days. 3 days of fevered sleep, of Victoria changing dressings and forcing soup down his throat, of him slowly returning to a sharpness that did not match a normal 28-year-old man. He moved like someone trained for violence even while injured, alert to every sound outside her thin walls, flinching less at pain than at the idea of being found. And yet, somewhere between day 1 and day 3, he also turned out to be unbearably particular about how Victoria chopped onions, deeply unimpressed by her taste in Korean dramas and completely unable to handle pepper soup. "This is poison," he wheezed, tears streaming down his face after one spoonful of the soup she'd made from spices smuggled in her suitcase 6 months ago and rationed like gold. "You're trying to finish what the bullet started." "Pepper no go kill you," Victoria laughed, watching him fan his mouth like a man on fire. "Korean boys just stay soft. In Lagos, we feed this kind soup to children and they still grow strong." "Then Lagos children are warriors," he said, gulping water like it owed him money. "I take it back. You are not dangerous. You are a terrorist." "Say one more bad word about my soup," she warned, pointing the spoon at him like a weapon, "and I go let the next bullet finish you myself." He smiled then, really smiled, the kind that softened the sharp lines of his face into something younger, something less guarded. Victoria noticed it and immediately busied herself with the dishes, annoyed at how her own heart had decided, without permission, to react to a stranger's smile. It was on the third night, with the city lights filtering weakly through her curtains, that things shifted from survival into something else. He was sitting up by then, color back in his face, watching her grade English worksheets for her tutoring students at the small table she used as a desk. "Why did you help me?" he asked, quiet in a way he hadn't been before. "You didn't know me. I could have been the criminal you keep calling me." Victoria didn't look up immediately. She thought about lying, about saying something light to keep the air easy between them, but something about the stillness of the room made her answer honestly instead. "Because nobody helped me when I land in this country with nothing," she said, finally meeting his eyes. "I promised myself that day, if person ever need help and I fit, give it, I no go turn my back. Even if the person be wahala, even if na trouble waiting to happen." "I am trouble," he said, no humor in it now. "More than you know." "Then make you tell me," she said simply, "or make you keep your secret. Either way, you don't need to explain why I help you. Some things you just do because know who you be." He looked at her for a long moment, and something passed across his face that Victoria couldn't name yet, but would come to recognize later as the exact moment Choi Wonbin decided he could not simply disappear from her life once his wound healed, no matter how dangerous that decision might be. He left on the 4th day, slipping out before dawn while she slept, leaving nothing but a folded amount of cash on her table that made her gasp when she counted it, enough to cover 3 months of the rent she'd been drowning in. She almost cried, half from relief, half from an ache she refused to name. She told herself that was the end of it. A strange chapter closed, a story to tell her sister back home one day, and nothing more. Seoul, however, was not finished with Victoria Job. A week later, the convenience store where she worked the afternoon shift had an unusual visitor. A black car parked outside longer than any car should, until finally a man stepped out, dressed sharp enough to make the regular customers stare, scanning the small shop like he owned the building, which, as it turned out, he actually did. "Excuse me," he said, stopping in front of her register. "Are you Victoria Job?" "Who's asking?" she said carefully, instincts from that bloody night still sharp under her skin. "My name is June," he said, offering the smallest, most controlled smile. "I work for Mr. Choi. He would like to see you. Mr. Choi, who? She asked, already suspecting the answer, already feeling her stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the realization that the man bleeding on her kitchen floor had not been some random victim of a street fight. That was how Victoria Job learned that the man she'd stitched up with cheap thread and pepper soup was Choi Wonbin, heir to one of Seoul's most powerful and most feared organizations. A man whose family controlled half the shadows of the city's nightlife, whose enemies had been hunting him that night, precisely because his own cousin wanted his position badly enough to spill blood for it. She refused the car at first, out of pride, out of fear, out of the simple fact that her shift wasn't over and her manager would dock her pay for leaving early. It took Wonbin himself showing up the next evening, leaning against the counter like he hadn't nearly died in her kitchen a week prior, grinning at her exasperation, to finally convince her to hear him out properly. "You could have told me you were some kind of mafia prince," she said, arms crossed, refusing to be charmed, despite every part of her wanting to be. "Instead, make you just a lie for my floor like Agbro a lost fight." "Would it have changed anything?" he asked, leaning closer, voice dropping in a way that made her pulse betray her completely. "Would you have still helped me?" She hesitated, hating that she didn't actually know the answer. "Maybe I go still help you," she admitted finally. "But at least I go fit prepare my heart for Wahala like this." "Too late now," he said simply. "Your heart already agreed before your mind could argue." What followed was the part of the story Victoria would later struggle to explain to anyone, the slow unraveling of a woman who had sworn off complications, falling steadily, stubbornly, for a man whose entire world was built on complications. He showed up at odd hours with food from restaurants she could never afford, claiming he simply happened to be in the neighborhood, though Itaewon was nowhere near his usual territory. He learned her schedule without being told, appearing exactly when her shifts ended, walking her home through streets that suddenly felt safer with him beside her, though logically his presence likely made her a bigger target than ever. He brought her gifts she initially refused on principle, until he learned to disguise them as practical necessities she couldn't argue against. A better umbrella when it rained, a thicker coat when the wind turned cold, a phone with better battery life after hers died during one of their calls, and left him pacing his penthouse in something dangerously close to panic. "You don't need to do all this," she told him one evening, sitting on the narrow steps outside her building, sharing a single cup of coffee because he'd shown up without enough cash on him for once. A fact she found endlessly funny given his family's wealth. "I want to," he said simply. "Is that not allowed?" "It's not about allowed," she said. "It's about why a man like you with your kind of life want to waste time on a Nigerian girl way just to survive in your country." He turned to look at her fully then, something fierce settling into his expression. "Don't ever call yourself a waste of my time," he said. "You saved my life when you had every reason to walk away. You didn't know my name, my money, or my family, and you still chose to help me. Do you understand how rare that is in my world? Everyone around me wants something from my name. You wanted nothing. You still want nothing." "I want my rent paid on time," Victoria said, breaking the tension with a small, helpless laugh. "That's all I want." "Already handled," he said, deadly serious, and when she swatted his arm in protest, he caught her hand instead, holding it like he had no intention of letting go. It was a few weeks into this strange, dangerous courtship that the comedy of their cultural collision became its own kind of love language. Wonbin attempting to eat jollof rice with chopsticks while Victoria filmed the disaster on her phone for her sister back home. Victoria attempting to use Korean honorifics correctly and butchering them so badly that Wonbin's bodyguards, stationed discreetly nearby, had to turn away to hide their laughter. Wonbin learning the phrase "a beg no vex" and using it so often so seriously that Victoria nearly choked on her drink the first time he deployed it during an argument. "A beg no vex," he said one night, attempting to apologize for canceling a date due to sudden business, his accent mangling the words just enough to be adorable. "Where you hear that?" Victoria demanded, fighting laughter. "Your sister taught me," he admitted, "during our video call last week. She says I need backup phrases for when you're angry. My sister's a traitor, Victoria announced to the empty street, though she was smiling too hard to mean it. Even his bodyguards became part of the comedy eventually. There was June, the serious one, who had appointed himself unofficial referee of every petty argument Victoria and Wonbin had, occasionally stepping between them with both hands raised like a man separating two boxers. And there was Minho, the younger one, who started a secret betting pool among the staff over how long Wonbin could go without checking his phone for a message from Victoria. A pool Wonbin discovered only after losing the longest bet by a humiliating margin of 4 minutes. You people are betting on my private life, Wonbin said, scrolling through the group chat Minho had forgotten to hide quickly enough. It's not betting, Minho said, already backing toward the door. It's morale building for the team. I want a cut, Victoria said immediately, holding out her hand, completely unbothered by the invasion of privacy. If my man's weakness day make you people money, I deserve commission. There were softer moments too, the kind the comedy made room for rather than competed with. A night where he cooked for her badly, burning the rice, setting off the smoke alarm in her tiny apartment, both of them collapsing into laughter on her kitchen floor in nearly the exact spot he'd once bled out. The irony not lost on either of them. A quiet evening on the rooftop of his building, the city lights spread below them, where he taught her a few words of Korean, and she taught him a few words of Yoruba. And somewhere in that exchange, he leaned in and kissed her for the first time, slow and certain, like a man finally arriving somewhere he'd been trying to reach for weeks. Jinja. He murmured against her forehead afterward, voice unsteady in a way she'd never heard from him. I really did not plan for this to happen. What didn't you plan for then? She teased, still catching her breath. To survive, he said quietly. That was the whole plan. Survive, take my position, keep everyone at arm's length so no one else could be used against me. And then you dragged me through an alley and ruined all of it. You're welcome, she whispered, and kissed him again before he could argue. Peace, however, did not last long. Before Wonbin decided Victoria needed to meet the one person in his family whose opinion still mattered to him, his grandmother, the formidable Choi Soonja, a woman who had survived 3 husbands' worth of business rivals and was rumored to have once negotiated a truce armed with nothing but a kitchen knife and pure stubbornness. You want me to meet your grandmother? Victoria repeated, staring at him like he'd suggested she walk into traffic. The same grandmother we almost run mafia family with cooking spoon? She'll like you, Wonbin said, with the kind of confidence that immediately made Victoria suspicious. Probably. Probably, Victoria echoed. Wonbin, probably is not a word I want to hear before I meet anybody's grandmother. The dinner itself became, in Victoria's retelling to her sister later, the single most terrifying meal of her entire life. Terrifying not because Grandmother Soonja was cruel, but because she said almost nothing for the first 20 minutes. Simply watching Victoria over her tea with eyes that seemed to calculate everything, her intentions, her usefulness, all in one unbroken stare. You stitched my grandson back together, she finally said, not a question, setting her cup down with deliberate precision. With a sewing kit, like a torn shirt. Yes, Ma, Victoria said, sitting up straighter, refusing to let her voice shake even though her hands were doing exactly that beneath the table. I no get fancy equipment, I just use what in I have. And the soup, Grandmother Soonja continued, the one that made him cry like a child. Too soft, Victoria said before she could stop herself, gesturing toward Wonbin without looking at him. I no even use the strong pepper. If I use the strong one, go don faint. There was a long, dangerous silence, the kind where Wonbin actually reached for Victoria's hand under the table, bracing for disaster. Then Grandmother Soonja laughed, a sharp, surprised bark of a laugh that made every staff member in the room visibly relax, as though they'd all been holding their breath for this exact verdict. Good, she said, pointing a finger at Victoria. He's been surrounded by people too afraid to insult him properly his whole life. Pathetic, all of them. You I like. Thank you, Ma, Victoria said, exhaling so hard she nearly knocked over her water glass. "Don't thank me yet," Grandmother Sunja said, already turning back to her tea. Already done with the conversation in the abrupt way Victoria would learn was simply how she operated. "Thank me when you survive a full year with this family. Then we'll see if you deserve a real compliment." Wonbin, walking Victoria home that night, couldn't stop laughing at the memory of her face the moment his grandmother had laughed. "You looked like you were calculating your escape route through the kitchen window," he said. "Because I was," Victoria admitted. "I already map out which window I go jump from if she vex. My grandmother adores you," he said, pulling her closer against the cold. "Do you understand what that means? She has disliked every person my cousins have ever brought home. Every single one." "Maybe she just ain't hungry," Victoria said. "Maybe into the soup recipe she liked, not me." "Take the win, Victoria," he said, laughing into her hair. "Just take the win." "Fine," she said, smiling despite herself. "I go take the win. But if she changes her mind, I'm blaming you." But Seoul's underworld did not pause for love stories. Wonbin's cousin, Choi Daesung, the same man who had orchestrated the ambush that nearly killed him, had not given up his ambitions simply because his first attempt failed. Daesung had spent weeks quietly tightening his grip on allies within the organization, and when he learned of Victoria's existence, of the strange Nigerian woman who had stitched his cousin back together and somehow stitched her way into his heart as well, he saw not a romance, but a weakness, a pressure point, a way to finally bring Wonbin to his knees without firing a single shot himself. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day Victoria had learned to treasure precisely because nothing dramatic happened on it. She was walking home from her tutoring job, earphones in, mind already on dinner, when two men stepped directly into her path, blocking the narrow street with the casual confidence of people who had never once been told no. "Victoria Job," one of them said, not a question. "Mr. Choi would like a word." "Which Mr. Choi?" she asked, already backing away, already reaching for her phone, her pulse hammering with the specific fear she'd hoped never to feel again. "The one who actually deserves the name," the man said, smiling in a way that held no warmth at all. She ran. She had never run so fast in her life. Lungs burning, the unfamiliar streets blurring as she cut through an alley, doubled back through a market still closing for the night, finally bursting into a noodle shop she recognized and slamming the door behind her, begging the startled owner to lock it, to call someone. Anyone. Her hands shook so badly she could barely unlock her own phone to call Wonbin, and when his voice answered, sharp with immediate alarm at the panic in hers, she had never been so relieved to hear anyone in her life. "Stay exactly where you are," he said, voice gone cold and controlled in a way she'd never heard from him before. The voice, she realized distantly, of a man who had been raised his entire life to handle exactly this kind of crisis. "I'm coming. Don't open that door for anyone but me." He arrived faster than should have been possible, flanked by men who moved like soldiers, his face carved from stone as he pulled her into his arms the moment the door opened, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart slamming against his ribs. "I'm fine," she whispered into his chest, though her voice betrayed how untrue that was. "Just shaken. I'm fine, Wonbin." "You will never be in this position again," he said, pulling back just enough to look at her, his thumbs wiping at the tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I should have ended this with Daesung the moment he showed his hand. I let it continue because I wanted to protect you from this world, and instead I nearly handed you to it." "So end it," Victoria said, surprising herself with the steel in her own voice. "Whatever you need to do it. I no come Seoul to die for somebody else's family fight, but I also no come here to run from you. So fight, Wonbin. Fight and come back to me." That night, unable to sleep in her own apartment with guards stationed outside her door for the first time, Victoria sat wrapped in a blanket on Wonbin's balcony while he made calls in low, clipped Korean to men she had never met. His entire demeanor transformed into something colder and more decisive than she had ever witnessed. When he finally finished, he found her staring out at the skyline, knees pulled to her chest. "You should be asleep," he said softly, settling beside her. "How I go sleep," she said. "When person one use me as bait to hurt you. Wonbin, I never sign up for this kind life when I land for this country." "I know," he said, guilt heavy in his voice. "And if you tell me to walk away right now, to disappear from your life so you never have to deal with any of this again, I will do it. I'll hate every second of it, but I'll do it, because you deserve a life without men with flashlights chasing you through alleys." Victoria turned to look at him fully, searching his face for a long moment before she answered. "If I won walk away," she said quietly, "I would have left that first night, before I even stitch your wound. I no day here because I'm trapped, Wonbin. I day here because I choose you, trouble and all." "Even Daesung?" he asked. "Even Daesung," she said. "Just make sure when the trouble finish, you still get all your fingers, because I no get strength to stitch anything bigger than skin." He laughed despite everything, pulling her into his side, and for a while they simply sat there, watching the city that had brought them together in the strangest way possible, neither one willing to let the fear of tomorrow steal the comfort of that single quiet night. What followed was not a quiet resolution. Daesung, desperate and exposed once his plan to use Victoria as leverage collapsed, made one final reckless move, attempting to ambush Wonbin directly at a meeting, meant to settle the dispute peacefully between the organization's elders. Victoria, against every protest from Wonbin's men, refused to wait safely away from the danger, arguing with a stubbornness that left even his most hardened guards speechless, until finally she was allowed to remain in a secured room nearby, close enough to hear if something went wrong, far enough, in theory, to stay safe. The confrontation itself was brief and brutal, a clash of loyalty and betrayal among men who had grown up calling each other family, ending only when Daesung, cornered and out of allies willing to die for his ambition, was forced to surrender, stripped of position and protection both, exiled from the only world he'd ever known. Wonbin walked away from it, bruised, exhausted, but alive, and the first thing he did before addressing his elders, before accepting the formal weight of leadership being placed fully onto his shoulders, was find Victoria and pull her into an embrace so fierce it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. "Gwenchana," he murmured against her hair, the same word he'd used that first bleeding night, except this time it wasn't a lie meant to dismiss his own pain. This time it was a promise. "I'm fine. We're fine. It's over." "Better be," Victoria muttered into his shoulder, equal parts relief and exasperation. "Because I no get strength today patch you up every week like this. My thread dawn finish." He laughed then, real and unguarded, the sound of a man finally allowed to feel safe in his own life. "Then I suppose I'll have to stop getting shot," he said. "That's the bare minimum," she said, pulling back just enough to look at him properly. Bare minimum. Months later, Victoria Job's life looked nothing like the one she'd imagined when she first landed in Seoul with 2 suitcases, and a dream the city had tried hard to crush. She still worked, stubbornly, refusing to let Wonbin's wealth erase the woman who had built herself from nothing, though she'd finally found a clinic willing to recognize her nursing qualifications. Work that let her help people the way she'd always wanted to. She still argued with Wonbin about pepper levels in soup, still mocked his chopstick skills, still taught him new pidgin phrases that he deployed with terrible, endearing seriousness in front of his very confused business associates. Grandmother Sunja, true to her word, had not softened entirely, but she had started sending Victoria recipes she claimed were family secrets. Recipes that suspiciously resembled dishes from restaurants 2 streets from her house. A small running joke between them that Victoria never had the heart to call out. Her sister, watching all of this unfold through video calls and grainy photos Victoria sent at odd hours, eventually flew in for a visit just to confirm with her own eyes that the stories were real, that her sister truly was dating a man whose bodyguards opened car doors and whose grandmother sent recipe texts. She spent the entire week teasing Victoria mercilessly, Recording videos of Wonbin attempting Nigerian dance moves at a small family gathering, his hips refusing to cooperate no matter how patiently Victoria tried to guide him. Wonbin? You dey move like robot way just charge, her sister cackled, phone held up despite Victoria's protests. Mr. Mafia Prince can run a whole organization, but he cannot whine waste. I can learn, Wonbin insisted, attempting the same move for the fourth time with the same disastrous result, sweat beading at his temple from sheer concentration. No, both sisters said at the exact same time, dissolving into laughter while Wonbin stood there, wounded pride and all, before finally laughing along with them, because by then he had learned that losing gracefully to Victoria's family was simply part of the price of loving her, and somehow it was a price he paid happily, over and over again. But every night, no matter how the world outside their door behaved, Wonbin came home to a woman who had once dragged a bleeding stranger off the street simply because it was the right thing to do, never once imagining that single choice would hand her an entire life she hadn't known she was searching for. And every night, Victoria fell asleep in the arms of a man who had been raised to trust no one, finally home and the one person who'd never wanted anything from him at all, except perhaps his heart. Sarang, eh? He told her one quiet night, the words slipping out unplanned, raw and certain. I love you too, she answered, no hesitation at all, even though you almost die from my kitchen floor and ruin my favorite rug forever. I bought you a new rug, he reminded her. You bought me a rug worth more than my old apartment, she said, laughing against his chest. Noah for you. If you've made it this far, you already know exactly the kind of story this channel exists to tell. Stories where love refuses to stay in its lane, where danger and tenderness sit at the same table, where two worlds that were never supposed to meet collide anyway and somehow make something beautiful out of the wreckage. If Victoria and Wonbin's story moved you, made you laugh, made your heart race a little during that alley scene, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment telling me which moment hit hardest. The pepper soup disaster, the grandmother dinner, the rooftop kiss, or that Tuesday afternoon chase, because I read every single one of them. And if you're new here, stay a while. This channel is just getting started telling the stories nobody else is brave enough to tell.